Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today I have the pleasure of company of Nikunj Trivedi, the president of CoHNA. Nikunj, Namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel. How are you?
Namaste. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Nikunji, just a few days ago, the NCRI has published its findings on what played out in the Leicester riots. And there are several lessons to be taken away from this particular sequence of events for the global Hindus. So let's first take a look at what the report said, and then I'll leave it to you to take this conversation as to what is the impact of these kinds of planned events on other people living peacefully. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so a few days ago, the Network Contagion Research Institute, which is based here in New Jersey, came up with a very interesting report that analyzed sort of social media accounts, as well as the sort of data from natural language processing and various different things that talked about how online hate can lead to real life violence. And in this particular situation, they analyzed the events surrounding the Leicester riots, where the Hindu community was under attack. And they found that what they call cyber swarming and sort of misinformation led to the attack on the Hindu community. So in the report, there are several things in terms of who the key players were. Some of the folks who have a notorious history of very Islamist views, as well as support for terrorists and sort of antisocial elements, amplified the rhetoric and false narrative, and essentially portrayed the Hindu community as basically terrorizing Muslims and things like that. They also brought in the idea, these influencers, that so-called Hindutva, RSS, BJP organizations and I would say agents were playing a big role in targeting Muslims in Leicester. Now, the NCRI report, as well as the report from the Henry Jackson Society, came up with the conclusion that that was not the case, that there was no kind of organized RSS, Hindutva, quote unquote, BJP attack against the Muslim community. But historic rivalry between India and Pakistan fans flamed the sort of hatred on both sides, and the amplification by these social media accounts. They were specifically using Hindu terminology or targeted Hindu. So when they were saying Hindutva Nazis or Hindutva terrorists attacking, no such thing was there, because the people over there, the local Hindu youth, were just British Hindus, British citizens that had no connection with any kind of organized quote unquote Hindutva terrorists, and as they were talking about in the narrative. So the NCRI basically deconstructed that kind of a social media messaging. But what they tried to show is, and we can see the report, how a swarm, what they call cyber swarming, a swarm of coordinated attacks, leads to these types of vulnerability amongst the Hindu community and targeting of the community. This happened in Leicester, which is very interesting because there is a Damani Hindu community that actually migrated from Daman to, I think, Africa and then to the UK. Very little connection to India, some of them. And of course, there are Indian immigrants there as well. So the timeline you can see from August 28th, when the India-Pakistan cricket match was there, that's where this whole thing started. Pakistan Murdabad, Hindustan Murdabad, those types of chants are very, very common in India-Pakistan matches. I mean, I grew up in India when I was a kid, and I used to remember like this was happening on streets and many places. Similarly, you can start to see like fans clashing. The videos were being circulated, and one of the key players there was the guy by the name of Majid Freeman. He's a well-known Islamist in the British community, and he's the one who insinuated this whole thing that Hindus ripped up a Quran previously nearby, a mosque was attacked and things like that. And that's when the whole thing started. So between, as you can see, from August 30th to September 4th, various Pakistani accounts portray Hindus as basically a very dangerous threat to the Muslim community in Leicester, and etc. So that continued on, and you started to see the mobs vandalizing Hindu homes, attacking properties. You may have seen those videos out there. Various types of attacks were going on. Of course, various Indian accounts from the UK, from outside, were expressing their outrage, saying this cannot be happening. They were asking for the police to intervene and seek help. So there's a lot that went on. And then also potentially around, I would say, September 9th and 10th, or rather September 7th through 10th, you can see some very important influencers who have a significant amount of followers started to talk about Hindutva RSS thugs. They started to talk about saying, oh, these guys are, basically coming in and they're talking about Hindu girls dancing there, and they're provoking Muslims by dancing near a mosque, things like that. And then this guy, Smile to Jannah, basically said that, he was warning the quote unquote BJP not to mess with Pakistani gangs who will be pushing back. So that continued on. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see that there was finally what ended up happening was there were all these calls to descend upon the temple in Birmingham, where an event was supposed to be held, and these influencers were basically telling all these sort of Muslim brothers, quote unquote, to come down to the temple where there was going to be some attack or this Hindutva Nazi, as they were calling, were gathering. So now, essentially, there you saw a mob of about 200 Muslim men who were basically provoking and rioting, not rioting, but like basically shouting angry, phrases. And you had to see the police basically cordoning off the area when the Hindus inside the temple were terrified by this mob. So this was the kind of stuff that you start to see. There's a lot more, right? But just to kind of understand the timeline and the fact that these social media influencers using various types of Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, social media awareness to actually push this false narrative and misinformation against the Hindu community, and saying that these Hindutva terrorists and Nazi Hindutva people were coming in and taking over and things like that, and really terrorizing Muslims, which was completely proven false, not just by this report, but also by the Henry Jackson Society's report, which goes into extensive details about this phenomenon. So this report has some very, very interesting findings for those who are interested in technology and natural language processing. There's some really cool graphs that talk about sort of the pattern of how these attacks came about. One piece of information in there, there was this idea that, there was this false idea that, Hindus were the attackers and Muslims were just responding. But when you looked at the social media language that was analyzed by them, it was actually the other way around, where basically what the Hindus were doing is they were responding to the aggressive attacks that were happening on them from there. And a lot of the Hindus are really talking to the police, while the other side was really talking to these Islamist accounts and relying on them for information, while the Hindu accounts were relying on the police, the Leicester police, to really get more information and condemn these attacks and clarify this. So there were many places where the police intervened to say there was no mosque burned or none of that stuff happened. So there's a lot of good information. And final point, there's a pie chart that shows the fact that 67 or 2/3 of the sentiments was anti-Hindu, while 1/3 of the sentiment was anti-Muslim. So clearly there's a lot more anti-Hindu sentiment. That doesn't mean there was no anti-Muslim sentiment. There is always this, I would say, friction between the Hindu and Muslim community, especially in some of the immigrant diaspora that we have, like India-Pakistan issues and things like that. But that is just normal, quote unquote. It's nothing from an organized perspective. While if you look at the Islamist side of things, the Islamist accounts were actually very well coordinated and organized with very, very similar messaging across the board. They used things like pajits, which we have seen before, right? That's a word.
Yes.
Then they used the idea of cow piss drinker, right? The slur of cow piss drinker has become a global trope that is used against Hindus all over the world, including the guy who one of the terrorists who blew up people in Kashmir. Before he blew up, he actually used the words cow piss drinker. So pajit was also used by an attacker on one of the synagogues actually in the US. So you can see some of these anti-Hindu tropes being used across these Islamist accounts to call for violence against the Hindu community in many different ways. So this is where the NCRI report is so critical for us to understand how social media swarming can lead to real life violence against the Hindu community, no matter where you are.
And viewers, we have two links at least in the description section. One is this full report of the NCRI, and the other is an article in Sunday Guardian that talks about the Henry Jackson Society report on what really happened. So you have all the references in the reference section of this video. So I encourage you to go educate yourself, because the NCRI report is very, very good. It tells you all the different markers to look for. We may not be aware of some of the ways that we are being derogatorily addressed. Like Pajit, I don't know. Only when I started looking at the NCRI report did I understand that this is being used. Again, there are channels like 4chan that was not in this particular report, but in a previous report, they said that there's a lot of extreme verbology being used there. So what I'm trying to say is we need to educate ourselves as to when these things are happening. There seems to be a concentric effort, concentrated, planned, well-planned effort that is happening. So at least next time you come across some of these things, maybe you can forewarn the others and saying, okay, clouds are forming. So Nikunji, this Leicester lesson and also the subsequent hash of a report that the Leicester city did in terms of like trying to characterize this violence, that's all behind. Let's look forward. This is essentially a sort of a warning for any peace-loving Hindu want to go to the temple. You don't know when you are going to be encircled and threatened. That to me is a big fear, Nikunji, especially in the Bay Area. We have hundreds of temples.
Yeah, no, so I'll tell you something. What's interesting is just to kind of come back to Leicester, the media over there, and I spoke with a bunch of analysts over there, the media has been very, very silent about the role of these sort of extreme Islamists in this whole thing. And in fact, what was really unbelievable was the media actually took more weight from the people like Majid Freeman than others that we are, from the Hindu side of things. So rather than doing their own due diligence, they failed to do that because they were concerned about fears of Islamophobia. Obviously there are alleged fears of Islamophobia, but what's really happening is that these sort of extremists use this idea of Islamophobia to silence any critical analysis. So a lot of media just basically did not even cover the Hindu perspective on this stuff until the Henry Jackson Society report came out to show that there was no quote unquote Hindutva involvement. Now, so that's what really also concerns me, because here the Hindu community is our viewpoints, our concerns are completely sidelined by the entire media. All the major media outlets failed to do that until the Telegraph actually covered the Henry Jackson Society report. So that's what we are seeing. Of course, in India, a lot of people are oblivious to what goes on in diaspora many times. They're happy watching some of the other things that are going on, but there's some real deal going on here. So there's I think the population there is 1.5% Hindus. So it still is a very small population, right? And you could be targeted to some of these things. Now let's come back to the global impact. When I was looking at this sort of Leicester pattern, I realized some very key lessons that we as Hindus need to understand. I live in the US, so I'll give you an example. So in the US, what is going on right now, and you may have heard also, in Edison, New Jersey, there was a parade that happened a few months ago during India Day, the India Day parade, where apparently a bulldozer, right? There was a bulldozer that was, paraded there, and that bulldozer was essentially made a basically anti-Muslim symbol. Now, I mean, personally speaking, I can say, well, was it a good idea, bad idea? I don't know. People have the right to do what they want to do. But the fact that you now take one particular incident and target an entire community saying that, oh, you guys are all Hindutva, you guys are all RSS, there's an RSS hand to be played here. All this stuff that has been going on from that day, it has led to basically a resolution that was passed by Teaneck, New Jersey, right? The mayor condemned it, not just that whole thing, but the resolution, and we talked about this before in various places, the resolution actually calls for federal investigation against Hindu organizations, okay? And it also talks about dismantling Global Hindutva Conference and how the quote-unquote Hindutva people attacked the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. Let me remind people that in the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, they basically said Hinduism is a threat to universal brotherhood and peace. They targeted 5 Hindu last names, including mine and yours, as well as 3 others, and said that these people are purveyors of violent Brahmanism. So essentially, my daughter, who's a little one, who was born and raised in America, is somehow extremely violent just because she has a last name. Okay, and that also assumes the fact that we're all sort of this like Hindutva right-wing people. Then they also talked about the fact that Hinduism is basically like Nazism, and Hinduism must be dismantled. So this is the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, and this resolution actually says that Hindus who protested against the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference are some BJP, RSS, Hindutva people, and not just parents or community members or anything else. So this kind of narrative is now being pushed very, very hard by various organizations. You have the Indian American Muslim Council, you have the Hindus for Human Rights, Council for American Islamic Relations, a bunch of different groups that are portraying misinformation on these types of incidents. Now, let's talk about the incident that happened. So there was a event that was being held in New Jersey about Sadhvi Ritambaraji. Okay, so again, you could agree or disagree on whether your Sadhvi Ritambaraji has certain strong views or not views. This is not the point of it. The point I'm trying to make is, imagine cyber swarming. Okay, so there's like 150, 200 people that may have attended that event. And all of a sudden, you have a cyber swarm that is saying everybody descend to that temple, and these Hindutva Nazis are showing up there. Let's teach them a lesson. That can turn into a violent event, okay, with some real life consequences. And that is really my concern. So all of a sudden, Hindus don't have the freedom of speech, and they are being terrorized and silenced, while anybody else can say what they want to say and have the freedom of speech. No one's asking anybody to go to that event, right? People have the right to go or not go. But the fact that you want to shut down an entire event on some hearsay, or this sort of somehow this global Hindu Illuminati, like the RSS, as they say, is taking over the world and is a danger to America, that is the kind of rhetoric that I'm very, very concerned about. And it puts all Hindus in harm's way. So whether you are either part of RSS or not part of RSS, it doesn't matter. The moment you say Hindu, you become this extremist. And that's what my concern really is with the lessons that we are learning from the riots that happened in Leicester. And we saw just in your neighborhood, right? We saw the attack in the Taco Bell, where a guy was just ordering food. He shows up and orders some vegetarian food. All of a sudden, this one dude decides to go on a rant, calls him all kinds of things, somehow connects Modi to it, somehow connects RSS, like all this other stuff, right? And the guy was poor guy was just ordering food with his son, and his son was terrified. This is the kind of stuff that we are concerned about, really. This happened in Canada as well. Not the same incident, but a similar incident in Canada too.
Nikunji, one of the challenges that the Hindu diaspora faces is, for the longest time, the diaspora has ignored all these taunts. It's not like these taunts are something new. It has been ignored for a long time. Now, the Hindu diaspora is paying back. And suddenly, they don't want you to do that. In fact, if you remember, there was a video in doing the rounds after Leicester and before Birmingham, where a guy is saying, you better not come back on the street and demonstrate again. So what it is that they seem to want the exclusive privilege of taking out processions and calling anyone any name. And when the other side responds in kind, they don't like it. I mean, this is a free speech place. Everybody has a right to air their views. So why is it that they find it problematic when the Hindu diaspora starts reacting back, giving it back in their same coin? Nikunji, this part has to really get sorted out. I'll tell you another problem that these people are also doing, and they are actually hurting themselves, in my opinion. There was a gentleman, he looks very professorial. He is sitting, I believe this is in Chicago, and he's exhorting Muslims not to go and shop at Patel stores. Okay, this kind of name calling will actually come back and haunt them. This is happening in. Go ahead, please.
No, it's very unfortunate. It hurts both communities. See, the thing is that it hurts the Hindu community and the Muslim community. There are Muslims who don't really want to support this violence or this kind of a rhetoric. But what's happening is there's a very loud minority of Islamist sort of like people who are super loud, and they are the ones who are ringing the bell, sounding the alarm, all kinds of things going around the entire U.S. and portraying Hindus as this like murderers and Nazi sympathizers and things like that. And so it's really hurting the potentially cordial relations, because at the end of the day, Hindus don't want to have these kinds of issues with anybody. Right? We don't. I mean, if you look at India, right? When I was growing up, it was kind of a very interesting environment. When I came here, I was 15 years old, so it was like 30 plus years ago. And my point is that when I was growing up, you could see that while there were tensions going on, there was this idea that, look, we're all here together. All we want to do is raise good families, enjoy the beauty and culture of India, things like that. But there is this sort of loud minority that ends up kind of messing the things up between the community. So that's number one. Number two is because this has been the established narrative, right? And Hindus are now learning, thanks to information age, thanks to just being more vigilant, and Hindu organizations pushing back, they don't like it, essentially. And this is also in academia. If you look at the academic Hinduphobia, it's even, for me, it's even worse. But it institutionalizes the hate against the Hindu community, because you are being taught that this community is violent. So in fact, I'll give you an example. If you look at the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference, then there was a conference in 2020 at UC Davis where they actually, the entire agenda was all about, Hindus are being weird, they're like as weird, violent, and exotic and erotic. The entire agenda of the conference. Now, if you're doing that, and then what happens is these are the papers that are taught in various, academic channels, courses, and things like that when it comes to Hinduism. Now, finally, yesterday or the day before, the Washington Post carried an article on Diwali, okay? And we tweeted about it. Basically, the article was Hindus are pushing for Diwali, but some people find it problematic, okay? Where the young girl, the young reporter who wrote the article starts off with like some, interesting information about how Hindus are, trying to get Diwali in different places and so on and so forth. But in the middle, as she's talking, she inserts a quote from two the quote-unquote Hindu groups who are basically anti-Hindu. One of them is Hindus for Human Rights. And so the founder of that, Sunita Vishwanath, basically says that, oh, it's fantastic that this is happening, but we are concerned that Hindu nationalists are using it for their agenda. So essentially, parents, kids, teachers, community members who want Diwali to be a school public holiday in different schools across the US are all of a sudden part of a Hindu nationalist agenda. So every time there's a Hindu discussion, there's always a Hindu nationalist discussion. And it's like they cannot be separated. And that's what these guys want to do. They want to continue to show equals Hindu nationalism. And that's this whole trope and specter is being raised against the Hindu community. And it's creating a lot of issues in policy making. It's creating a lot of issues in just the general conversations, because I've come across people who would never talk about this even in my work or in my mainstream. And I've seen people talk about saying, oh, is Modi killing Muslims in India? Right? I mean, I've been asked this question, and I'm shocked at a dinner where somebody actually asks me this question. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Where are you getting this information from? Right? So this is the kind of narrative, but it happens because continuous barrage in media, continuous barrage in academia, and also policymakers making this false allegation. So in the case of New Jersey, coming back to New Jersey, all different from the top level senators all the way to the local I would say council members were very quick to condemn this whole bulldozer thing. Okay, very, very quick. Everything as if it was just a script written. But when it comes to condemning anti-Hindu narrative, it took us several months to go to all of these people and get a statement extracted, right? And they did condemn the anti-Hindu speech. Some of them were very fluffy, but at least we got that, right? So we are being put under a different litmus test versus other communities, and that is completely bigoted against our community.
And there's also obfuscation going on. Did you mention the name Sunita Vishwanath?
Yes.
Is she from Hindus for Human Rights?
That's correct. She's the founder.
Bingo. That is an Indo-American Muslim Council sponsored organization. We've already done many programs. So this is how you're getting obfuscated. Hindu name, Hindus for, whatever H for human rights. Everything sounds Hindu, but the whole thing is being done by an organization with ties to radical forces out of Middle East. This is just nonsense. I don't understand what the Sunita Vishwanaths get from doing this kind of. Are they so dumb and ignorant that they don't know where the Gangotri of their funding is? Nikunj, you probably know more than I do.
See, I don't know about ignorance. You have to be supremely ignorant to do that. But I don't think it's an agenda. Essentially, like, see, you have an ideological difference between most of the Hindu community. And by the way, these two organizations are the only organizations. The other one is Sadhana, Coalition of Progressive Hindus. Right. So, but both founded by Sunita Vishwanath. These are the only two organizations that are considered supporting this type of anti-Hindu narrative. If you look at all the major Hindu temples, Hindu organizations, they do not support these two organizations. And we have talked to many organizations out there, and we have said, are you guys supportive of this stuff? These were the only two organizations that supported the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. Okay, these two are the only organizations that continue to support people like Professor 𝙜𝙧𝙤𝙪𝙥𝙀. Right, so you can really see, and they have never talked about persecution of Hindus. In fact, recently there was a resolution introduced about Bangladesh. You may be aware of that.
Yes.
HRS 1430. And CoHNA and various Hindu organizations worked hard to educate lawmakers about the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh, and it's recorded history. Okay, no one can deny it, including Senator Ted Kennedy himself went there, right, to see the whole violence, and he very clearly said that the Hindus were being targeted. This is his words that are part of the congressional records. And yet the Hindus for Human Rights basically decided to say, well, why are we really focused on Hindus? We should call it Bengali. Well, this is the kind of obfuscation that they engage in, right? And this is the problem that we face. And now what the media does, the media picks up these guys and essentially makes them the spokespeople for the Hindus, when 99% of the Hindu community doesn't support them. But it's because they want to support a particular narrative about Hinduism and a particular narrative about Hindus. So they use certain groups like these two to support their narrative. In fact, what would be really interesting for you, 𝙒𝙧𝙤𝙪𝙥𝙥, is that there was an article in MSNBC on swastika. Okay, and the CoHNA and other organizations have done tremendous work in the swastika campaigns, but apparently they couldn't find people like us to quote on the swastika, so they decided to get Hindus for Human Rights to be quoted. And actually, Hindus for Human Rights, whoever the person was, basically said that the swastika was used by the Nazis. Okay, now no Hindu that is worth their salt will ever say that the swastika was used by the Nazis. We have talked about this in detail, that this is the 𝙒𝙬𝙬𝙳 and not the swastika, right? But because the lack of understanding, but also ideologically aligned with some other anti-Hindu forces, you have a different way of thinking about it. And that is actually damaging the Hindu diaspora and the Hindu community. This is what's really going on. And even as we speak, there's a lot of this type of activism to show this Hindutva Nazis everywhere, about to take America or something like that. This is the kind of portrayal that we are seeing now.
I have a video that I did rebutting Jagmeet Singh, I think his name is, of NDP of Canada. And this is exactly explaining to him what swastika means. And I'm going to put a link to that also. So viewers, please do watch it. I mean, this is a very historical significance to this, and I'm not going to waste the time here to explain what it is. Please do watch that, because if you have any doubts, you should go back to where this thing originated from. And I have given you a book, Dharma Yoga, and you can see that it's been inscribed in coins. And so, people have found bricks from the Mohenjo-daro excavations that have that. So anyway, so there is copious amounts of proof as to what it means. So Nikunji, in conclusion, we need to kind of caution our friends when you're going to places. If you see something out of the ordinary coming through your social media, timelines, do find out a little bit more. Be aware of what you're doing, where you're getting to. If you'd like to conclude, I'll leave it to you, and then we can call it a wrap.
Sure. So there are a few things that people need to understand. First of all, we need to have robust community resiliency programs. Other communities, such as the Jewish, the Muslim, various communities, Sikh communities, have created programs where their community volunteers or professionals come in and train them about community resiliency, how to report a anti-Hindu, anti-Muslim crime or anti-Jewish crime, anti-Semitic crime, things like that. So that's number one. Most of the Hindus don't really report of crimes that are happening against them. They will just report it as a general crime, but not as a hate crime from a religious or ethnic background. Number one. Number two is we need to educate our lawmakers. It's not a selfie moment. We cannot have a selfie moment. We can't go to a lawmaker and say, oh, everything's nice, let me take a selfie with you. No, you need to let them know that we are, as a community, we are facing some issues that they need to be aware of. And we did a congressional event this year on the first time in Capitol Hill, where Hinduphobia was discussed widely by various lawmakers, because the lawmakers need to understand what this phenomenon is. The other communities, Muslim community and the Jewish community, have done a good job explaining Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, the different things that they face. But on our community, it's been very difficult for us to explain Hinduphobia and what it means and why it's a problem for us, because even our own people don't think it's a problem until the fire comes to your house, and then it's too late, right? Then the other piece is that besides, there should be concerted efforts. There needs to be efforts to support organizations that are on the forefront of this, because other communities have organizations that speak on their behalf and act on their behalf to make sure that their community's interests are protected. We don't have that organizing power just yet, but we need to build that. I will conclude actually with a quote from 𝙒𝙗𝙪𝙦𝙤's article. Recently, he wrote an article about Hinduphobia being a global phenomenon. He quotes his last sentence in the article: "We may not face physical extinction yet, but avoiding it has been conditional on our cultural extinction," which means no symbols on our bodies, clothes or homes, no festivals and gatherings in our temples, no compassion for our sacred animals, and soon perhaps no worship for our gods and goddesses except in utmost secrecy. This is not the mark of a society where freedom of religion is supposed to exist. So this is a very powerful article that he recently wrote as well.
Thank you so much, Nikunj. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. As always, a pleasure having you, Nikunj. And we look forward to more such useful interactions where we bring together all the issues facing our community and see how best we can face them and get ahead of these things. Namaskar.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Namaste.